Hi everyone, welcome to this afternoon's webinar. I'm just going to give people another minute to join and then we'll make a start. Okay, so we'll make a start. Today's webinar is about the changes to the furlough scheme, or the coronavirus job retention scheme, as it's otherwise known. I'm Nichola and I work at PayFit as a payroll expert, and I'll be hosting the webinar today. So today we're going to be covering what is changing with the coronavirus job retention scheme, what this means for employers. Then we're also going to take a look at recording furlough or using the furlough feature in the PayFit app. There will be time at the end for me to answer any questions that you might have, so please put any questions in the question and answer box at the bottom of your screen. So now let's take a look at what's changing in the coronavirus job retention scheme legislation. So the main theme around the changes that we're seeing from the 1st of August until the scheme ends on the 31st of October centre around mainly a reduction in the financial support that employers will be seeing from the HMRC. So from the 1st of August, for those employers who still have employees on furlough leave, you will no longer be able to claim any employer pension or employer national insurance contributions from the HMRC that relate to furlough pay. From the 1st of September, employers will be able to reclaim 70% of the employee wage as opposed to the previous 80%, and this will be capped at £2,187.50. From the 1st of October, the claim amount will reduce again to 60% of the employee's wage, and this will be capped at £1,875. It is worth mentioning that this will not reduce what the employee will be receiving during furlough leave. The employees will still be entitled to receive 80% of their wage. It is the amount that the employer can then reclaim that is changing. And on the 31st of October, we will see the coronavirus job retention scheme come to an end. There are no plans at the moment to extend this past the 31st of October. I know the government has been urged to consider it, but there has been no announcements as of yet. So what does this actually mean for employers? So as I've already mentioned, the impact to employees is going to be zero because they're still going to receive their full 80% furlough pay. But the employer is going to have some mandatory costs to cover. What I have done is I've provided an illustration on this slide based on an employee who receives the maximum furlough pay of £2,500 per month. So you can see what the mandatory costs to employers are going to be from the 1st of August. So as we've mentioned, in the 1st of August, the employer is going to have to cover the cost of full employer national insurance and employer pension contributions, but employers will still be able to reclaim the 80% furlough pay. This is then going to reduce in September, and employers will have a mandatory contribution to make towards the employee's furlough wage of 10%. Which equates of up to £312.50, where the employee receives the maximum furlough grant that they can receive. Now, from the 1st of October, this is the mandatory contribution for the employer is increasing again to 20%, which equates to up to £625 again, where the employee is receiving the maximum furlough grant of £2,500. Now, as of the 31st of October, the scheme is coming to an end and employers should continue to plan as such. And this means that employers are going to have to decide whether or not they're going to return staff, and this may be returning staff on their previous contractual conditions. It may be making some contractual changes, such as reducing working hours. But for some companies, and I've seen a statistic this week that for 33% of companies, the end of the furlough scheme is going to signify a few redundancies in organisations. Now, what I will say is that whether you're returning employees on amended contractual arrangements or you're making employees redundant, please be sure that you are aware of the appropriate legal processes that you need to follow. Now, just to note as well, if your employees are flexibly furloughed, which means that your employees do work some hours but are furloughed for the remainder of the pay period, any payment made towards the worked hours will not count towards the mandatory 10% and 20% top-up that employers will have to make. So how does this actually impact employers? So we're going to take a look, and I've just used some screenshots of our pay slips in the PayFit app to show how this is going to look over the next couple of months. So from the 1st of August, and it is worth pointing out that you will see that the employee's gross pay will not change over this period. So from the 1st of August, when employers can still claim 80%, employers will still see that the maximum furlough that they can reclaim that will show on the employee's payslip is £2,500. From the 1st of September 2020, what the employers will see is that the amount that they can reclaim will reduce, and the amount that employers have to contribute towards their employees' pay will increase. This will also increase again from the 1st of October until the end of the scheme on the 31st of October. Now we're going to take a look at using the furlough feature in the PayFit app. Firstly, I want to use this as an opportunity just to update our customers who are on the webinar of how we will be managing the furlough legislation changes. So firstly, the changes to the employer national insurance, the employer pension, and the reduction in the reclaimable furlough amounts will be changed automatically. So there's nothing you need to do. You don't need to go into any employee records and amend any payments. This will happen automatically from the 1st of August, then 1st of September, 1st of October, respectively. You will also see that the furlough claim reports that you may use to do your HMRC submissions for the furlough claim will also change. You will see from the 1st of August that employer national insurance and employer pension figures will no longer appear on the report anymore. And then again, when the amounts that can be reclaimed from the HMRC reduce in September and October, you will see the amounts of furlough pay that you can claim for your employees reduce. And finally, from the 1st of September, there will be a mandatory employer top-up that will show on the payslip as base pay top-up, and this will be separate to the reclaimable furlough amounts. This will make sure that the employee still receives the same gross amount, but it will also indicate where the employer has contributed towards the employee's furlough pay. So next we're going to take a look at recording flexible furlough. So flexible furlough is the newer aspect of the furlough legislation that allows employers to furlough their employees, but also bring them back to work for periods of time whilst they receive full pay for doing this. Now, it's really important that we record flexible furlough accurately. This ensures not only that employees are receiving the correct pay, but that we're reclaiming, or you are reclaiming, the correct amounts from the HMRC. Anything that you overclaim from the HMRC will have to be paid back. And of course, anything that you are underclaiming means that there's a shortfall that you are covering unnecessarily so whilst your employees are furloughed. Now, when recording flexible furlough, This only needs to be recorded once in the PayFit app. And what I mean by only having to record this once is that you don't need to record the furlough leave separately for every day or week that your employee is working or is furloughed. You can record for flexible furlough leave from the 1st to the 31st of August. And what we will ask, and it is the only thing that we'll ask you to input as an employer, is to input the total amount of hours worked for that employee in that pay period. Now, this screen here is the flexible furlough screen in the PayFit app, and I just wanted to highlight two very important boxes to make sure that the PayFit app is calculating your furlough correctly. And the first is that if you have an employee who is flexibly furloughed, you will need to activate the employee's flexibly furloughed toggle. This will then allow the PayFit app to do the correct calculations to calculate the employee's usual hours, which is the average amount of hours that we use for the furlough calculation. And the next thing, as I've mentioned, and it's the only other thing that we'd need you to input, is the hours that have been worked by the employee in that month. Now, if you are unsure of how things like usual hours have been calculated, what we've done, and I've highlighted it on this screenshot here, is we've provided a information section that shows how usual hours are calculated. Something that we do try and do in the app whenever something is automated or there's a calculation behind the scenes is provide employees with a breakdown of how it's been calculated, and also a link to the legislation if you want some more information on that. So next I want to cover one of the biggest variables with the furlough legislation. Now, some of our customers on the webinar today may have seen only one of these screens, or you may have seen both. But effectively, furlough pay calculations are entirely dependent on whether or not an employee has fixed earnings. For example, they receive 1/12 of their salary every month, or they have variable earnings that change from pay period to pay period. Now, for employees who have got fixed earnings, the furlough calculation is relatively simple because we look at what the employee earned in the period before the March 2020 pay period, which for the majority of our customers is the February 2020 payroll. And what we do is we take the earnings in that period and we work out the 80% furlough equivalent for those employees. Now, for employees whose pay varies because maybe they use our time tracking facility within the PayFit app, or they are a 0-hour worker and they have their hours input each month and they vary, the calculation is slightly more complex because we need to do two calculations to work out which figure to use. The first one is the average of all of the 1920 earnings, which is why you'll see a full breakdown of all of the earnings that we hold in the app. And the next, we look at the same pay period in the previous tax year. For example, employees who are on furlough leave as of August 2020, we will look back at what they earned in August 2019. And if that amount is higher than the average for the 2019 tax year, that is the amount that we will use. So that is quite a significant difference in how the two are calculated. And I just wanted to raise that, especially if we have an employer who has maybe different contract types within their organisation. So they may have seen both screens. So next we're going to take a look at furlough top-ups. Now, when we say furlough top-ups, I'm just referring to the amount that employers voluntarily provide their employees. The mandatory top-ups from September onwards will be handled automatically by the PayFit app, so you don't need to add anything in this screen for those. Now, if you do want to enhance the employee's 80% furlough pay, typically employees who are paid more than 80% of furlough tend to be paid 100% of pay. We have two ways of doing this in the app. The first is by asking employees to enter a percentage amount. So if employees are to receive 100% of pay, employers will input 100%. Now, one thing to note within the PayFit app, when the top-up is being calculated, the app will use the same reference pay, so the February 2020 pay, for the 100% top up as it does for the furlough pay. So if you have an employee who has potentially had a pay increase and you're wanting to pay the higher amount, what we would ask you to do is use the box where you input a monetary value to input the monetary value that that employee should be receiving each month based on 100% of their pay. Now, on this final slide, I want to talk about one of the most common questions we get, and this has become more common since the introduction of flexible furlough. And that is, how has my furlough pay been calculated, or how has my employee's furlough pay been calculated? Now, I won't talk through each calculation in depth because it is a lot to take in, and also this video will be shared so you can go back and review this at any time. But I do want to highlight a few things that often cause confusion, not just within PayFit and our customers, but also, when I'm speaking to other people in different payroll networks about how furlough pay and top-up pay and worked hours are also calculated. So firstly, reclaimable furlough pay is always based on calendar days if an employee is fully furloughed. And this is quite a significant change to most companies because most companies use some variation of a working day calculation. And if an employee is flexibly furloughed, the furlough reclaimable pay is calculated in hours using usual hours, which is an average of what the employee usually works across the month. That means more often than not, the actual calculation itself will not fit in with the employer's regular salary calculation method. Now, for the base pay top-up, this will be based on the employee's February reference salary that was used, unless you've updated the app to tell the app to use a different top-up amount. This goes back to what I said on the previous slide. If your employee has increased their salary since February 2020, you may want to honour that higher salary, and therefore you would tell the app what higher salary to use. And finally, there are worked hours, and this relates to flexible furlough. Now, this is based on the employee's current salary, so not the February 2020 salary. This is based on their current salary. And this is converted into hours, and then the flexible furlough base pay is paid at an hourly rate. And again, this doesn't necessarily fall in line with an employer's contractual means of payment. A lot of employers use a daily rate based on working days. But for the purposes of adhering to the HMRC legislation, we have to use an hourly rate of pay for flexible furlough. Okay, so that brings me to the end of the presentation. So I'm going to take a look and see if we have any questions. Oh, so we have had a question from Katie. Can we make the screen bigger? I do apologise, Katie. The screen does look a little bit smaller when we host it on the webinar, but we will share these slides with you so you can see them. More than happy to try and zoom in on a slide. If there's something you want to ask a particular question about, just let me know. And we've had a question from Helen. Can we send a copy of the slides or the payslip screens? The full presentation will be shared with you after the webinar, so you'll be able to review all of the slides, including the payslip screens then. Now we'll just hang on to see if we have any more questions that do come through. Okay, I'll still give it another couple of minutes. Okay, we've had a question from Sam. Can you tell us a bit more about the coronavirus job retention scheme? So one of the things that signifies that it looks like the coronavirus job retention scheme in terms of furlough pay is coming to an end is that the government are starting a new initiative called the coronavirus job retention bonus. And effectively what this is going to be is that for every employee who has been on a period of furlough and is kept in continuous employment through to the 31st of January 2021, the employer will be able to reclaim £1,000 per employee who meets that criteria. Now, the bonus scheme will be available for all employees that were eligible for the furlough grant. So it doesn't matter if you're a large employer or a small organisation, you will be able to claim. The HMRC have committed to issuing some additional guidance at the end of September. But we do know that employers will be able to claim for this bonus after they filed their January 2021 real-time information, with payments being made to employers in February 2021. Okay, we've had a question from Helen. Can we go over how furlough pay is calculated again? Yeah, that's absolutely fine. I'm not sure whether you mean the actual how we reach the figure that we're going to use for furlough, or whether we look at the actual proration. So I'll cover them both for you. Let me just go back to the screens. Okay. So when it comes to calculating furlough pay, it is dependent on whether or not the employee has fixed earnings or variable earnings. So for employees with fixed earnings, we use 80% of the salary that they were paid in February 2020. For employees with variable earnings, we use the higher of their average 1920 earnings or the earnings in the same period in the previous tax year. So let's just have a look at the payslip calculations again. So the payslip calculations that I've put together are based on an employee who is flexibly furloughed. So they do an element of work, but remain furloughed for the rest of the time. So what we need to understand when it comes to the payslip calculation is firstly what pay we are using for the furlough calculation, how many hours the employee would usually work over the month, and then out of that figure, how many of those hours are worked and how many of those hours are furloughed. So when we look at reclaimable furlough, and again, this is for flexible furlough, but I can explain full furlough for you as well. We look at the February 2020 pay. We divide it by the usual hours that the employee would work in the month. Then we multiply it by the number of hours that the employee has been furloughed. If you have an employee who is furloughed for the entire month and they are on fixed furlough rather than flexible furlough, we would take the February 2020 pay, so in this instance, the £2,343. We would divide it by the number of calendar days in the furlough period, and then we would multiply it by the number of days in that period the employee was actually furloughed, and then again we times it by 80%, and that would give us the amount that is reclaimable. When it comes to the base pay top-up, what we do is we use the February reference pay, but this time we don't times it by 80% because we want to know what the difference is between that full salary and the furlough amount. So for an employee who is flexibly furloughed, we will take the annual salary and we'll work out what the hourly rate of pay is. Once we've worked out the hourly rate of pay, which in this instance is £14.03, we will times it by the number of hours that they were furloughed. And this will give us how much that employee would have received had they been on 100% of their February 2020 pay. We will then deduct the amount that has already been paid as furlough, and this will give you the residual top-up amount in this instance, which is £280.69. And that process works exactly the same for employees on fixed furlough, but rather than using hours, we'll use calendar days for the reclaimable furlough and working days for the base pay top-up. Do let me know if that doesn't quite answer your question, if you want any more, if you want a breakdown of that. Okay. We don't seem to have any more questions coming through, so I will bring the webinar to an end. But I do hope that this has been really helpful for you, and the video of the webinar will be shared, which contains the slides. And from a customer perspective, if you do have any questions, you can always get in touch with us via Zendesk. If we have non-customers on the webinar and you do want to see more of the Furlough feature and other aspects of the PayFit app, please get in touch to book a demo with us. Thank you.